Hi, my name is Adora and I'm here with Milton Chen, Senior Fellow at the George Lucas Educational Foundation. So tell me a little bit about what you do, the GL.
GLEF, George Lucas Educational Foundation, primarily publishes a great multimedia website about the future of education. It's Edutopia, edutopia.org, and we've been publishing this website for close to 15 years now. And it is a website that tries to capture using documentary film, because we work for a filmmaker. We use that medium to show especially what the future of learning looks like in classrooms that exist today. So we don't have to hypothesize or get theoretical about it. We can look and see exactly how students are doing project-based learning, how they incorporate cooperative learning and learn social and emotional skills in their learning, the use of technology. So we've profiled over 150 different schools, mostly U.S., across the country.
And where have you seen the impact of Edutopia studies? Have you seen schools that are directly taking some of the techniques that you've showcased?
Yes, increasingly, and I would say especially during the last 5 years or so. This has a lot to do with how technology has continually gotten better and better and faster and cheaper and cheaper, that many schools, districts, states, not just in the U.S. but around the world, are accessing our site and able especially to see the films. We support the films with a lot of PDFs, lesson plans, technology plans, articles describing in more detail what these innovations are related to, say, one-to-one programs where every student has a laptop or a digital device. But yes, many more schools, especially in the past 5 years, and really during the past year itself, we've hit an all-time high of more than 500,000 individual visits per month to edutopia.org.
Yeah, you call 2010 the first year of the 21st century. What do you think has driven this real urgency about adapting technology?
I think there are a couple things going on with American schools where we're in a particular period of time, the past year or two, where we're turning a corner on innovation in education. Innovation used to be something that we talk about and maybe it's nice to know about. I sometimes call it a nice to know but not a must do. And really during the past year, I feel that American schools are finally getting the kind of leadership and vision as well as a teaching force with younger teachers coming in and older teachers who are embracing technology and what it can make available. And we're now beginning to move towards a 21st century school system that uses every day and every week, every month as a learning day or week or month for our students.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate here and be a principal who's maybe a little skeptical about technology. Technology, it might be getting cheaper, but it's still expensive. Why do I need to care about moving into the 21st century if my students are getting okay test scores and nothing seems to be really wrong with my school?
Well, the first thing to recognize is that tests don't measure what we want students to know and be able to do. That we're way behind in terms of creating the kind of assessment that our students need to be able to work in the workforce today. That principle should talk to people working in businesses, law firms, architecture, health centers, and see what are the skills that are needed for our next generation of workers, and then think back, are we providing that to our students today? Usually the answer is no. That if you're working in a 20th century model or that's also based on a 19th century model where the teacher is the sole source of information, students are trying desperately to learn the information that's in the teacher's brain or maybe in the textbook. Now we have the internet for that. The information sources that kids need to understand and master are so much more diverse and so much richer. When you think that you can visit the world's great museums online, we were just looking at Google Art Project, looking at what the Smithsonian is making possible for students, the Library of Congress. The array of resources and learning experience for students is so much vaster than just a classroom without technology.
So I know that the benefits are obvious and the schools really need to jump on this, but what if my school doesn't have the money to purchase technology, and what if it seems to be in really short supply? What then would you suggest for schools that might not have as many resources as their wealthier counterparts?
Well, one of the things many school districts are doing, and many states now, is really looking closely at how instructional materials are purchased, starting with textbooks. When textbooks cost a school district $150 per student for each textbook, whether it's history, math, science, that amount of money would pay for technology, for every student to have a laptop computer, not just a smaller digital device like a smartphone, but a laptop computer, hardware, software, broadband access to the internet and professional development. $250 per student per year is what Maine and their laptop program says it costs for one-to-one access, and Maine is still the only state in the United States where you can walk in and every student, every middle school student, has a laptop computer.
Now, when you think about giving laptops to kids, a lot of people think, well, I'm not really comfortable with them just taking it around. What would you say to people who are very skeptical about laptops' ability to get kids interested in learning, that we're not just going to slack off and play games?
The first thing I'd ask adults, whether they're policymakers, legislators, school board members, principals, who don't quite understand this yet, the first question I would ask them is, do you use a computer? Mm-hmm. And I would say 99.9% of them now would say yes. Then I would ask them, how would you like to share your computer with 5 other people? That's the state of access in American public schools. Basically, 6 students for every computer that we have. So we've got a long ways to go to provide every student. And I just ask the same questions of adults in their own lives. How do you live and work? Let's just make sure that students have the same tools that we as adults have.
So giving that equality to everyone, whether you're young or old, rich or poor, I think that that's a really admirable thing to do. But a lot of school districts will say, is this realistic? Can we do that? But what you said about changing where funds are allocated is really interesting.
There are many ways, I'll just add, there are many ways in which school districts especially need to modernize. When you think about it, the school district is really one of the last institutions in our country to move towards this digital platform, this technology platform. When you look across every company, here we are in downtown San Francisco, every company, every museum provides computers to its workers, librarians have access to technology, universities, you name it in the working world, everyone has one-to-one access. So we just need to provide that to every student.
Okay. What would you say to, and there are lots of people who say so, this is just adopting technology for the sake of having technology. What are some real learning gains that kids can have, whether it's through a one-to-one laptop program or through project-based learning? What are some of the real learning gains?
Yeah, and I think that we haven't, as advocates of technology, we haven't said enough about the applications in curriculum. Mm-hmm. But there's no question that, again, while we've been debating this for the past decade or so, technology has just gotten better and better and faster and cheaper and cheaper. So you name the subject area and the wealth of resources, whether it's science, mathematics now, arts. We were just looking at Google Art Project, where Google has sent its cameras that have made Google Earth possible through the world's best museums. And you can actually do a virtual tour through these museums, come upon the artwork, and get information about every piece of art in those collections.
Yeah, instead of paying hundreds of dollars for a field trip, buses.
Yeah, the virtual field trip I think is one of the most positive things. We can now take kids out to the national parks here. I'm an advocate of getting kids into nature, and of course there's costs involved with transporting kids to national parks that aren't in their own cities and communities, but now through technology we can do that just about for free.
What are your thoughts on, so you talked about Google's tools, what are your thoughts on open source and free technology, and how, can you give me an example of how you've seen that being used in some classrooms?
Open source is a great example because there's a saying in the internet world that information wants to be free. And while very high quality information may make a living charging for content, again, most of what I've mentioned is free and open. So whether it's open source textbooks that we're moving to, open source collections of art, just across every subject area now, whether it's history and social studies, whether it's science and technology and math, we have great examples of open source content and more of it being created every week. So,
you obviously really care about this topic of technology and education, but did you go into college wanting to be in education, wanting to get involved on this level, or how did you really get into it?
Well, I would say the first early experience I had that led me down this path was getting a summer job at Sesame Workshop in the 70s. That as a college student I was able to experience a kind of creativity and innovation and use of technology back then. They were using a technology called television to make it possible for everyone American preschool age kid to have that kind of virtual experience with content. Animation, music, humor, characters, the Muppets, all devoted to teaching an early childhood curriculum. So I learned early on that technology can reach millions of students at again, a cost of just a few cents per day, a few pennies per day per child. I learned that with that technology you could do this and really lift the learning of America's youngest students. So that was one of the first experiences that led me down this path.
Would you say it's accurate to tell people who aren't involved in education, who might not be a teacher, a parent, even a student, that they can get involved in education in other ways? How do you think an average person, maybe retired, maybe has grown-up children, how could they get involved in education if it's something they care about?
One of our favorite models in all this is what is called the community-based school, which is a school that becomes the center of the community and is open many more hours and weeks and months than the typical school. The typical school operates in I call it a 6x5 by 180 year. 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, 180 days a year. But now learning can happen 24/7, 365. It can happen around the clock. It can happen every day of the week and across all 12 months. So many schools are creating this model, and it's not a new model. One of the first schools that we profiled at edutopia.org was a school in West Des Moines, Iowa that was doing this. So the school goes out into the community, the kids go out and study community-based problems, and then the community comes into the school. Parents come in and use the computer lab at the time. It was a lab where you go and get on the internet and find information related to health, employment, and the facilities of the school. The gymnasium, the theater, the computer labs, the ball fields became things that the community could use outside of that 6x5 by 180. So we like that model a lot, and through that model, many parents, community members, people who are retired and looking for a way to give back. It's a great way for adults to come in and mentor students. And again, it's across the different subject areas and not just in specific subject areas like math and science. It could be in the arts and theater as well.
Okay, now we've talked about obviously educators, principals, school district level, all this getting involved, and then also people outside of education. But what about students? How do you see student voice being utilized in schools that you've profiled?
One of the keys to creating this 21st century learning environment is taking student interest and enthusiasm and passion much more seriously. And that is something that school districts and generally adults have difficulty doing. This is an age-old problem, perhaps. But more and more we're seeing that many more teachers, for instance, are willing to say, I don't have to know everything. I think that's part of the problem in school reform is we put the burden of all of this on the teachers themselves. You have to learn. What are the best web resources? You have to be the IT specialist for your classroom. Something doesn't work, you have to figure that out as a teacher. We put so much of the burden on teachers, whereas again in the real world, we have specialists who do this. And one of the best ways to get kids involved with the learning process and the teaching process is to have them act as technology support staff for the teachers. Not just on making sure everything's working, but also helping the teacher find the learning resources and design the learning experiences. So there's a fair amount of content at edutopia.org about Generation Yes, for instance, which continues to be, a program that was originally funded by the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education, where students act as technology teaching assistants to their teachers. And that's one great example.
And there are a lot of examples of students taking control with technology, showing their teachers how to utilize things. But what about students who still may feel somewhat disempowered, who say, well, still a lot of things are outside of my control? Do you see a future where students are more involved as well in things outside of technology within their schools?
Do you mean in the actual operation of the school and how the school?
Possibly, but also things like, project-based learning, choosing what projects to do,
Yes.
having feedback for teachers, and more teachers being open to possibly learning from their students in not only technology, but...
Absolutely. I think a real key to the future is student choice as well as student voice. But this is about giving students many more choices and responsibility for their own learning. So that means you get to choose some topics. It's not just everyone learning the same thing at the same time in the same way, which has been the traditional classroom, but that in a group of, say, 30 students, you might have some teams of students who are investigating projects and questions more deeply, and the teacher becomes more of a guide. I think it's very important, and I think liberating for teachers to acknowledge that they don't have to be the sole source of information, and really aren't the sole source of information anymore for students.
So you have this, obviously, this vision of a classroom where teachers are guides, where teachers are learning from their students, one-to-one laptops, technology is really integrated. What would you say is your complete vision of the perfect or a close to perfect classroom or school? Is there one vision? Do you have this idea that you're working towards, or is it kind of varied?
Well, those are all the components of a 21st century classroom that we like to cite, and if you go to edutopia.org, you'll see our core agenda topics that have to do with project-based learning, moving from the textbook-based to the project-based, where the learning becomes much more authentic, and again, students get to investigate projects that are of interest to them. That's the important thing. They don't just get to choose projects that are of interest to the teacher, but they have some more voice and choice in it. The cooperative learning that supports social and emotional learning, where kids get to work together in teams. And that's not only good for accomplishing projects, because there's no way that in an ambitious project that one person can do everything. If there's one way of summarizing what the vision is, I like to say it's just 4 words and an equal sign. It's just that school life should equal real life. That the ways in which people live and work outside of school are what we want to have happen inside of school. Usually people don't work individually these days. The days of the solo practitioner are over. When it comes to medicine, when it comes to law, there's specialization now, because knowledge has become so specialized that we need teams of people to work on very big projects together. So we want teams of students, 4 or 5 students, 3 students, to work together on projects. Each of them has a particular role to play, and they create something much bigger and much more ambitious than one person can do on their own.
And finally, just taking what you said about the ideal classroom, I want to bring it back to when you went to school, and you're telling me about your schooling experience. What do you think, if you were a student today, what would you want to draw from your schooling experience when you were a child? What would you want to keep, and what would you want to make new from using 21st century tools?
I think one of the things that I most valued about my high school experience especially was working in teams. Those happen to be sports teams, non-academic teams. But if we could bring some of the thinking that comes from sports and the arts, where students again work together collaboratively in putting on a play, something like that, then I would think you could get much more project-based learning into schools. So I learned about the value of teams and teamwork, working with individuals who are different from you or maybe had a different perspective to contribute. I think that's also very important. And I also learned the importance of getting out into your own community. And some of this I discovered late, having grown up in Chicago, but I grew up in a community that's very rich in resources such as museums and Chicago history, but then local history was not really something that we studied in schools. I sometimes said if students could understand more about their own communities just within a long bike ride, within 5 miles of where they live, how this place came to be, why it came to be, what are the great events that have shaped this community. Here we are in San Francisco, and I like to ask San Francisco students, where's the oldest building in San Francisco? And they usually say, well, and adults as well, it must have been during the gold rush, during the 1840s. They know our team is called the San Francisco 49ers. They know that has to do with 1849 and the miners and the gold rush. But in fact, the oldest building in San Francisco still standing, or you can see the foundation, is 1776. And it is a Spanish fort where the Spanish explorers came up from Mexico and explored this piece of land. It's now in our national park. It's in the Presidio. And it's, most American students study in their history textbook the year 1776 and the events back in the East Coast. Wouldn't it be great if they understood, during that same year, here's what it was like here in our own community. Just a short bike ride from where we live.
So keeping the ideas of teamwork, but drawing in using 21st century tools, more project-based learning, and not only learning about the global world through the internet, but also about local community. Those are some really interesting points you've made, ones that I haven't heard a whole lot with learning from your community and getting out there. And that's something that I think it's valuable to really keep as we talk about technology, as we talk about communicating with people online, that we also keep that idea of face-to-face community, locality. So it was very nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
I
Dora.
really appreciate it. And I'm Adora Spitak, here with Milton Chen, Senior Fellow at the George Lucas Educational Foundation and author of Education Nation. Yes.